Hi, I'm Todd Pettigrew, and this is a story that I wrote a couple of years ago. It's called The Good King, and I hope you enjoy it. My friends, I hope that when I tell you there is a stairway in my house that I have always referred to in my own mind as the Stairway of Doom, you will not be overly alarmed, for it is, in all respects, an ordinary wooden staircase leading to a slightly damp yet functional basement of the sort that likely exists all over this redoubtable isle of ours. Why, then, you will be asking yourself, do I call it the Stairway of Doom? It is because it has always seemed to me that when I die, it will be at the hands of those accursed stairs. Ordinary and wooden, yes, but the depth of each step is devilishly small, Jim-dandy for my petite wife, but too small for my clumsy man-feet by at least 30%. They're steep, too, likely in violation of some building code or other, and they end at the imposing gray mass of the foundation wall. Is there no safety railing at the edge of this domestic death trap? Well, that depends. Can a thin line of copper pipe held by a tiny wooden bracket be rightly called a rail or safe? In short, I had long known that as I grew older, and my visual acuity and my manual, not to say footual dexterity began to fail, there would come a day when the treacherous flight would betray me, the steps, it would seem to me, disappear beneath my feet, and the stairway of doom would send me tumbling to my death. What I did not know was that day would be last Thursday. It was a dark, rainy December evening, but my spirits were high. Despite the lack of snow, Christmas was coming, my vocal group was booking carol-singing gigs, and best of all, it was the night my family had elected to put out our decorations. And what decorations they are! Squirrels dressed as Santa, foxes, also dressed as Santa. Scarcely a woodland creature scurries or capers on this green earth that is not represented in the Pettigrew box of holiday animal ornaments. The house festooned with this menagerie was a joy to behold, and I could not wait to share the experience with my wife and sons. Even my sister-in-law was to join us ahead of her upcoming departure for parts west to further her paramedicine career. But as joyful as our little nation becomes over the holidays, when the Yuletide passes, fast away the ornaments are stowed, and as the law of our land requires, they go into the basement. Meanwhile, outside my house, my all-season tires lay soaking in the cold rain, and in a rare fit of energy I was inspired to kill two birds, both dressed as Santa, with one stone. I would take the tires down and bring the ornaments up. An exchange of dark for light. What was more in keeping with the season? Buoyed by these thoughts and proud of my industrious plan, I began to sing softly to myself one of my favorite Christmas carols, Good King Wenceslas. And so it was that I, shod with my big winter boots and arrogantly carrying two large dripping car tires at once, began my fateful descent. All was well until the third stair. Just as I was singing about the carol's poor man coming into sight, gathering winter fuel, my right foot overextended itself, slipping rapidly in a manner most startling from one step to the next, a movement hastened by the moisture deposited there only seconds earlier by a soaking tire. With the extra weight of the wheel now pulling me down the stairs, I quickly overbalanced, and not the finest ballerina in Moscow nor Winnipeg could have retained her equilibrium. My only hope, I thought to myself, for time slows down in such moments of crisis, was the copper pipe rail. So I released the tires to their own recognizance, and with the agility that emerges only when one's life is on the line, I managed to twist myself in midair and grab at the pipe. I was, if I may be allowed to compliment myself, like a cat. Better than a cat, in fact. When it comes to grabbing copper pipes, cats are not your man. Their little claws are useless to the purpose. But my primate paw, wrapped securely around the conduit, arresting my fall, but for less than a second. For in another instant, the pipe had pulled away from the wall, and my full bulk, plus the bulk of two 16-inch radials, went crashing down the stairs, time, apparently, having returned to its normal pace, if not faster. My head struck the concrete wall with terrible force. The trailing tire struck my head with only slightly less force, and as a final humiliation, the treacherous length of copper pipe bounced off my addled coconut with an ironically jovial clang. A damp basement swam before me, and my spirit passed out of this world. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my basement, nor in any place I knew. I was still prone on the floor, but this floor was richly carpeted. It was night, but the room was lit by the glow of a blazing hearth and bright torches all around the stone walls. Men and women in elaborate cloaks and dresses drank from goblets, chatted amiably, and danced to the music of a lyre. Was this a castle? If it was certainly a castle of a bygone era. Was this heaven? Had some forgetful angel neglected to update the decor and playlist over the past millennium? Then a voice boomed out over the crowd. "See, gentlemen, see where my loyal servant Podavan plays the soldier and lies there upon the field of battle, felled by a cup of strong wine." There was much laughter in the room, and I slowly realized that it was at my expense. For a cup did lay next to me, and wine was even now seeping into the carpet near my head. But why was I being addressed by a different name? And then it came to me all at once. Somehow, following my own death, I had escaped my own time and place, and I had come to inhabit the body of this man from long ago, this Podavan, whoever he was. My friends, I can scarcely express to you the strange feeling that came over me in that moment. I have become used over the past 8 years or so to deathly visitors from other realms, carried into my life by all the various supernatural forces and elements that lurk under the surface of our reality. But this post-mortem transportum was a hearse of a different color. For now it was I who was dead, lost in a strange world and looking for answers. I had learned to handle myself when a ghost came into my life. But now the celestial tables were turned, and I was the ghost. "Podavan!" the voice boomed out again, startling me out of my horrified reverie. Looking up, I saw the source of the call, a big, handsome man, young, even boyish in appearance, despite his full brown beard. Seeing me looking up, he broke into a wide smile and laughed once more, shouting, "Behold, my friends, a miracle for the feast of St. Stephen! Podavan lives after all." More laughter as people returned to their various activities. Even the big man, apparently the host and owner of this grand edifice, turned away and spoke privately to another man in similar apparel who was gesturing towards the window. This other man looked even younger than the first, but thinner and more careworn, with a dark, drawn, brooding air made all the more foreboding by its contrast to the joyful tenor of the evening. And yet, even in the torchlight, there was a clear family resemblance. They must have been brothers. As I got to my feet, someone shouted, apropos of nothing, "Here's to our gracious host! Here is to the Duke of Bohemia! All hail Wenceslas!" And a mixed cry of "to the Duke" and "Wenceslas" sloshed around the room. Wenceslas? Could it be? The real Wenceslas? Was there a real Wenceslas? He had said something about the feast of Stephen, but if this really was good King Wenceslas, what did that make me? Podavan, apparently. Apparently some kind of servant. "Hither, page, and stand by me," came Wenceslas's voice again. Now he was standing at the window, but looking back in my direction. Apparently I was a page. As the partiers continued their dancing and drinking, I hesitantly made my way over. Yes, sire?" I mumbled, not sure how to address the Duke. "Yonder peasant," he said, pointing. "Who is he? Where and what his dwelling?" I squinted out into the night. The moon was bright and reflected off the deep snow, and so there was indeed enough light to see the form of a thin man moving along the tree line, Over his back was slung some kind of large open bag into which he deposited branches that had fallen. His load looked heavy, and the man appeared as if he could scarcely lift it, but he persevered. I looked to the Duke, who was staring at me with raised eyebrows. I gazed dumbly back at him. "Well," he repeated, "in sooth, boy, didst thy fall scramble thy brain? Where and what his dwelling?" "How am I supposed to know?" I replied. "He's 1,000 feet away. It is night time." The Duke peered out the window again. "Besides, am I supposed to have a comprehensive knowledge of every peasant in Bohemia, with their names and addresses?" "Perhaps this would help, my lord," came a silky voice from behind me. It was that other man, the mean-looking brother, and he was handing me a book. It was open and contained a long list of names and locations. One of them was underlined. "Ah, thank you, Boleslas," said the Duke. "At least my brother has kept his wits, even as my page has lost his." I looked at the name. Apparently his name is Mstislav," I said, stumbling over the unfamiliar appellation. It says here he lives a good league hence." "Ah, yes, of course," Wenceslas nodded. "Underneath the mountain." "Underneath the mountain?" I asked. "How can he live underneath the mountain? Is he some sort of mole person?" "You are correct," the brother chimed in, ignoring me. "Right against the forest fence, sire, by St. Agnes' fountain." The Duke continued to peer out the window. "Poor fellow," he said sadly. "Here we are, warm and content, with endless supplies of food and winter fuel, and this poor soul must risk being frozen in the snow to sustain his humble hearth. I wish there was something I could do for him." "Ah, but there is, sire," Boleslas returned. "You could bring him, I don't know, flesh and wine. What a message that would send to your people at this joyful yet difficult time of year, that even as we celebrate our Saviour in heaven, his appointed ruler on earth, the first in wealth and rank, the Duke himself, is showing a tender regard for even the lowliest of his subjects." "By heaven, you are right, Boleslas. Bring me that flesh and that wine, and, He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowed and his head at an angle. "Something else," he murmured. "Pine logs?" I suggested. "Yes, bring me pine logs hither. Wonderful idea, Pontifex. Thou and I will bear them thither. Imagine the joy on this poor man's face when the Duke himself shows up with a Yuletide feast." A few minutes later we were loaded down, or rather I was, with the provisions for poor Mstislav and his family, assuming he had one. Loaded down was no overstatement, for the other servants had not skimped on the pine logs. Add to that a cask of wine and about a third of a pig burdened me so much that I could hardly walk. Fortunately, that new body of mine was somewhat younger and fitter than the old one I had left behind in the future. I guess the Kit Kat bar had not been invented yet. And so we set out into the night. The frost was cruel, but Wenceslas was in fine spirits, singing loudly as though he had not a care in the world. I had several cares, however, not least of which was the fear of collapsing under the weight of his generosity. Even worse, the thin leather boots that I was wearing, more like thick leather socks than boots, were not very warm, nor was the little woolen cloak I had wrapped around me. A few minutes into the trip, and already I looked forward to being warm and dry back in the castle. "How far is a league, anyway?" I asked, and then quickly added, "Sire, when in medieval Bohemia." "About 1.5 miles, he said happily. "The ancient Gauls defined it as the distance a man could walk in an hour." An hour? It had been a long time since I had walked a full hour at once, let alone while carrying flesh, wine, and pine logs, and certainly not in the rugged foothills where we now found ourselves. And that was to say nothing about getting through the snow. But I was beginning to like Wenceslas, and the joy he was taking in helping a poor stranger moved me, and I vowed to remain as positive as I could under the circumstances. But after a half an hour more of this, by which time we had traveled perhaps half a league onward, my resolve was wavering. Clouds had obscured the moon so that we could now barely see the path before us. We could have fallen right into St. Agnes Fountain and drowned the way we were going. Not only that, but the gentle evening breeze that greeted us when we departed had now picked up into a steady gust right into our faces. Burdened as I was, and unused to such a prolonged effort, I stumbled and then fell into a snowdrift with a despairing whimper. In a moment the Duke was at my side. "Pottevin," he called out with genuine alarm, "how dost thou, old friend? What ails thee?" My positivity was all used up. "Fails my heart, I know not how, sire. I can go no longer." "Have faith, my good page. Remember the joys of this blessed season, and your strength will return." I did as I was told, and thought of my wife and my sons, and the Christmas mornings we had spent together, with blazing logs in the fire, and stockings so full that the magazines and bags of candy could not be hidden by the straining red velvet. The turkey golden and filling the house with its unmistakable aroma, the tree and the lights and the ornaments, the packages my wife put together every year for local people in need, the books and the movies, and the voices raised together in song. Yes, in song, like good King Wenceslas. The page in the song did not give up when his strength failed, and neither would I. "I will mark your footsteps, sire, and I will tread in them boldly. In so doing, the winter's rage will freeze my blood less coldly." "Well said, Pottevin," Wenceslas beamed back at me. "Thou art a poet truly. Onward to the forest fence." Needless to say, the poor man, Mstislav, was shocked to see the Duke at his door, but he humbly and graciously welcomed him in. The pig was roasted over the fire of pine logs, and we all drank, perhaps, a little more wine than we should have. But after all, it was the feast of St. Stephen, and you know how people get on St. Stephen's Day. The lady of the house dressed the meat with skill, and their 2 boys devoured their portions as though they had never tasted pork before. Laughing and carousing in the little hut under the mountain, which it turns out just means beside the mountain, was even more joyous, I thought, than the lavish ball in the castle, for we were all aware of just how precious such grand times really are. The hour had grown very late, when Wenceslas staggered out the door, heading for home. I held back for a moment and thanked Mstislav for the honor of his hospitality. "I shall never forget this St. Stephen's Day," he replied, still apparently a little stunned by it all. "Imagine," he said, "meeting the Prince and the Duke in the same day." "The Prince?" I said. "What Prince?" "Why, the Duke's brother, of course, Boleslas. I met him in the market this morning. He promised to give me a piece of gold if I gathered wood near the castle tonight." "Pottevin, where art thou?" came the voice of the Duke from outside, and I quickly said goodbye and left the hut. Our mission had concluded, but Mstislav's story bothered me, and when I caught up to Wenceslas, I shared my concerns. "Sire," I said tentatively, "how well do you and your brother get along?" "My brother? I would trust him with my life. Why dost thou ask such a thing?" "Well, it's just that it was his idea for you to come out here, and he happened to have that peasant's name and address right on hand just as he came in sight. Doesn't it seem like he might be plotting against you somehow?" Wenceslas turned on me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw anger in his eyes. "My brother, Boleslas the Cruel, capable of treason. If thou wert not my most trusted servant, I would have thee in a dungeon for such slander." "Wait, his name is Boleslas the Cruel? And you don't think he might be capable of going behind your back? Like arranging for you to be out of the castle alone and unguarded in the middle of the night, while everyone else is drunk and distracted?" Wenceslas scoffed, turned and headed back toward the castle. I was undaunted. "Sire, has there never been any contention between you and your brother?" He stopped. "Well, he was not happy when I pledged Bohemia to the Saxons." "Okay. Thou knowest in sooth that it was necessary. Our land was falling back into pagan idolatry, and only the Germans could provide us with the priests we needed to sustain our faith." It had grown only colder, and I lacked the patience for a detailed history of the religious politics of the 10th century, so I pushed to the main point. And Boleslas was angry about that. Oh, he was furious! Wenceslas laughed at the memory, as though it were the story of a childhood prank. I remember, he said to me, "Wenceslas, I will kill you for this!" His laughter trailed off. The wind fell silent. The moon emerged from behind the clouds. "By heaven," he said grimly, and pulling a massive sword from his belt, headed off towards the castle with even greater speed than before. I followed along as best I could, and when we reached the gates, our worst fears were realized. Before the drawbridge stood Boleslas, flanked by 5 huge soldiers, all armed to the teeth. "Your time has come, brother," sneered Boleslas. "Your treacherous reign has ended." "You dare call me traitor," the Duke returned. "You, who have conspired against your own brother. May you be cursed forever, as Cain was before you." And with that, he flew at his brother, sword drawn, screaming a battle cry. But Boleslas's men were ready for him, and well trained. They moved like panthers to protect their master, and though Wenceslas cut one of them down with his great sword, the other 4 set upon him and beat him mercilessly with their staves, pommels, and war hammers. I looked on, frozen in fear, hating myself for not intervening, but what could I do against such a force? The Duke lay gasping and bloodied on the snow as his brother loomed over him. Without a word, Boleslas stabbed him through the heart. The songs of Wenceslas were silenced forever. I let out a cry, and ran to the Duke, even as the prince and the soldiers turned away, laughing and joking about how there was soon to be a new Duke of Bohemia. Tears of sorrow and rage welled up in my eyes just as a glint of moonlight drew my attention. It was the Duke's great sword. It had been abandoned on the snow just as its master had been. Without thinking, I grabbed it and leapt to my feet. A few quick strides took me to the prince, who it seemed thought so little of a simple page that neither he nor his men had given me a second look. Boleslas the Cruel paid for that mistake with his life, as I drove the sword between his shoulders and through his black heart. As before, the soldiers pounced, and delivered to me a flurry of blows and wounds so rapid and violent that I barely saw nor felt them. Suffice it to say, for the second time that day, I had died. As before, it was not a particularly painful sensation. The world disappeared, and a gentle darkness swallowed me up. I felt relaxed, like I was lying on a comfortable couch. Yes, just like a couch. And there was a voice, a lovely musical voice, that sounded just like my wife's. And then, yes, the outline of her face came into view. I heaved a deep breath and opened my eyes fully, and I was back in my house, with my wife and her sister, who it seemed turned out to be an excellent paramedic indeed, and they were both greatly relieved by my recovery. "You're okay," my wife cried out. "Well, as okay as I ever was," I said, still quite groggy. "Come on," said my sister-in-law. "The ambulance is here. You're going to the hospital." "Sure, just let me grab my sword," I said, a little incoherently, as I was helped towards the door, through the flashing lights that illuminated what by that time had turned into a gently falling snow. As you can see, since then I have made a full, even miraculous recovery. My friends, I cannot say what currents of the spirit world took me away, nor can I say with any confidence why they brought me back. All I know for certain is that those who bless the poor shall themselves find blessing.